As parents, we cannot afford to just say, this is too hard. I give up. Here's your smartphone so you can be like all the other kids, play your games and call me. Just don't be stupid with it. Well, that's not going to work. It is hard, but dads, that's what we're here for, to do hard things for our families in order to protect them and provide for them. And this is just one of those areas that you've got to figure out.
Guys, this is the Growing Fathers podcast, and I'm John Dalrymple here with Christopher Shaw. Christopher, last week we talked about how to parent in a world of technology, and how to do that prayerfully, how to do that purposefully. This week we're going to focus on how to protect our kids online, which is harder than ever. As an example, you mentioned in your article that a curious teenager could actually access pornography through any app that integrates Twitter, including the YouVersion Bible app, which is just frightening. This is going to be a really practical episode with details and recommendations. But in addition, we're going to give some foundational biblical principles for protecting your kids and teens online. Because let's face it, technology is changing all the time. This is the Growing Fathers podcast, and we are just two growing dads trying to help other Christian dads become more like Jesus and apply the Bible to parenting for the strengthening of families and churches to the glory of God. Christopher, why don't you start us off with a highlight or lowlight from this past week?
Sure, I'll share a highlight. When my in-laws were in town at the end of the summer, they got our kids this 1 month pass to one of those indoor jump parks here in Phoenix. Yeah. The 1 month pass actually turned out to be cheaper than the 1 day pass. I think they were trying to get us hooked, but it turned out in our favor. There was a week there after camp and before school where we went every day. I think there was one night we took off, but other than that, every weeknight, and just jumped with the kids. I love trying new things with our kids, but it's also nice to have those standbys and to have that pattern that week. Every night we'd finish dinner and we'd go to the jump park and we'd be there for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then come home and go to bed. And it was fun to watch my youngest son, who's 2, learn to jump with 2 feet on the trampolines there. And then also my other son, he would play this video game that he really liked, that you had to jump and defeat, these killer frogs, and he got really good at that and beat the top level, and we celebrated that together. And then my girls were doing the obstacles, so it's just made for a sweet time with our family that was needful after a busy week of camp.
Sounds
what
like
about
they
you,
did
John?
Get you hooked on that trampoline park.
We liked it, but not enough to pay for annual membership.
Yeah, but benefit from that short week, you maximized that time. That's really cool.
We did.
Believe it or not, I've never been to a trampoline park in my whole life, so that's still on my bucket list. I'm actually not a huge trampoline guy. I can't do all the flips and everything like when I was growing up. My brother could, but our kids sure do love it, and they love when I jump on there with them, which I do occasionally. Dad gets on and everybody goes flying, and they love it.
Oh yeah.
Believe it or not, our little Ellie, who is turning 2 in just about a month. Wow. So she's about to turn 2, and she'll get on there. She's just determined to be on there with all 5 brothers.
Oh, wow.
And so she knows how to jump. But usually it's more like survival when she's on there with all their brothers. She's just getting flung all over the place. In addition to jumping, they'll like tackle each other, and as boys do. And so she gets in the middle of that sometimes.
Tackling is my kid's favorite as well.
On the trampolines. But anyway, fun times. Those are good. Actually, we need to replace ours because the springs are flying off, and it's becoming a hazard. We're going to get something replaced soon. Okay. I want to give a highlight as well. It was just a special week last week. We have 2 times in the year when we have 2 birthdays.
3
times in a year. 3 times in a year that we have 2 birthdays almost in the same week.
Oh, wow.
And so only a couple days apart. And that's for so it makes for in some ways a challenging week. There's a lot going on to try to celebrate both of those and do it adequately, but it's fun. So one special part of birthdays is that in the morning, Suzanne gets to go out with the boys for like a birthday breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the evening, I take them out for like an ice cream, go to Yogurtland, and then I build a little Lego set with them. So they get to pick out a Lego set each birthday. So it's just a special time to spend with 2 of my boys. So
neat.
Well, Christopher, before we dive into your article, could you briefly share what inspired you to write about protecting your teens online?
Sure. It started with just a Growing Fathers article that I had due. And I sat down to write it, and I said, I want to write something that would be helpful for the families in our church, and specifically for teens in our youth group and their parents. And so as I brainstormed, I realized that most of the major sin issues that had come up to that point in youth ministry, which this was a couple of years ago, involved technology in one way or another. And that was just something that I wasn't quite ready for coming into youth ministry. But a lot of the teens were getting into things that they should not online. And a lot of parents seemed, I'll just say, clueless as to how to help. Not to be, not to degrade them in any way, but it's challenging. There's a lot there to understand, and frankly, I did not understand it all. So I said, well, let's see if I can learn more about this and grab some resource to be able to help our parents. So that's where it came from.
That's great. I also serve families of teens in our church, and just a few weeks ago, I had one parent approach me about recommendations. Both of us have kids who are in that preteen stage, so we're now addressing these questions in our own homes. So it's definitely on our minds. Christopher, you've broken down protection for we could probably rope kids into that as well, right? Because they have devices around them all the time.
Yeah, we could. I mean, I'm pretty wary about the idea of giving kids a cell phone, especially under a preteen, but a lot of people do. I think teens also tend to be more curious and are facing more of those temptations post-puberty, but certainly kids would apply.
Yeah, the reality is that in our day and age, kids, whether it's through school or other means, are exposed to online to the internet in different ways.
Correct.
And so, and they have access to devices, and we're going to get into that some. But these
whether you want them to or not, their friends have them.
Right.
So it's just a reality. You're right.
So having a plan for a protection plan for our kids and teens is really essential. And you give a 3-level strategy. So explain your illustration of a pool and list those 3 levels for us, if you would.
Sure. So I live in Phoenix, and we have a pool in our backyard. And so growing up in Phoenix, I am well aware of the fact that pools can kill. It's a sober reality, but every summer we hear on the news about a poor child who drowned in his pool. There was even a slogan in Phoenix for a while: supervise your kids around water because 2 seconds is too long. And so when I saw a mutual friend of ours, actually Tim Ains over at LifePoint, I don't know if you knew he was the one I got this from, but he uses this metaphor in a presentation he did for his church, and it just immediately clicked with me, and I said, that is so helpful. And so he was nice enough to let me use it, and so I ran with it. But basically the idea is that protect your kids around, to protect them around water, you need a 3-pronged approach. So you need defense, and then second, you need the swim lessons, and then third, you need the supervision. And you really need all 3 of those things. And it's important to have them. If you don't have the fence, then I would say you're negligent. That's important. But if you don't teach them to swim, then you're sort of handicapping your children. Do you really want them to be still using floaties at age 18? It's kind of a funny picture. But then also you could say, well, you got to supervise them. It's just smart. And so the same illustration can apply to technology. If you want to protect your kids around technology, which can be very dangerous, we're also going to use the same 3-pronged approach. So we're going to build a fence, which would have to do with just filtering and limiting access. There's other ways you can limit access besides just filtering. We'll talk about that. But then also you want to disciple them. You want to train them, the swim lessons. And then third is the accountability, check-ins and accountability.
Yeah, that illustration is really helpful. But before walking us through the different types of online filtering, which you refer to as the fence, the first level of protection you mention, you say, quote, the simplest way to limit access to dangerous content online is to not give your teenager a smartphone in the first place. That's going to sound radical to some parents. How do you argue for this with a parent of teens?
Yeah, it's going to sound radical because it's countercultural, but I believe the cultural tide is turning on this one at least a little bit. This is an area where technology advanced so rapidly that parents' understanding of it, and even kind of the expert understanding of it and ability to protect our kids in this area, is lagging behind, but it's now catching up. But I would just say this, that first, teens got by for thousands of years without phones. That's true. I know it's kind of one of those things that dad would say.
Christopher, when did you first get your phone? Your
I
first
was
smartphone?
First smartphone was not till I was in seminary, so I was 22.
Yeah.
First phone, I was a freshman in college. What about you, John?
It was about the same for me when I was in
Yeah.
seminary as well. And then my first phone, I had the flip phone and stuff for a while, but we're aging
Right.
ourselves here. But
Right. So it's not something we necessarily dealt with, but the teens definitely, it's their world.
yeah,
Um, so it's a different world, but I just try to open their mind to the possibility that they can get by without a smartphone. I would say, though, secondly, when you're considering the potential safety risks of not getting them a phone. So in other words, I think it's just assumed, well, I'm going to get them a phone. Well, do you really want to do that? We say, well, think about all the safety risks, if we don't get them a phone. It's important to consider the safety risks if you do get them a phone. Like, you're opening them up to also some spiritual and even mental health risks, as our world would put it, that are significant. And putting the unfiltered internet in the hands of a teen, it opens up risks that can be terrifying. I would compare it to handing them a loaded gun. And sometimes we would say, hey, don't do anything stupid. Just hand them a phone. I mean, we wouldn't do that with a gun. And I'm not trying to be sensational here. I really believe this. Third, if you're concerned about your child's safety, which is legitimate, there are other options that you can get that will allow your child to contact you without handing them the unfiltered internet. So there are still dumb phones that you can get that's not a smartphone. There are phones that look like a smartphone, and they will allow them to call you, so they can save face in front of their friends, but actually does not connect to the internet. And there's other options out there, and I mentioned some of those in my article.
Yeah, you have a link there in your article to a comparison, I think, with different dumb phones. There's also just smart watches out there, where I know a few teens in our church have smart watches that allow them to text and to call their parents, so still getting that access to them for safety reasons, but not having access to everything else that you could get. Okay, so let's say that I'm aware of the risks, but I still think it's a good idea to buy my teen a phone. What kind of filtering can I set up to help limit his or her access to damaging content? Christopher, talk about the different types of filters, as you were talking about fences, DNS filtering, parental controls, additional software.
Yeah, I can do that really quick, and I'm going to quickly get in over my head here, so I'll just keep it basic. But those are the three. The ones that you mentioned are the three, and it is important. So DNS level filtering is basically controlling how your teens access the internet, and in the process, you can block certain mature sites. And so you can set up just certain controls on your home internet router as well as on the actual device itself that will block certain sites. And I'm not going to say anything more about that. You'll have to check the Protect Young Eyes article that I linked on my article to be able to learn more about that. But then parental controls are also a great tool. They can be confusing. I know they can be very confusing. I've followed tutorials on different parental controls, and it's like I'm getting lost here. You'd really have to focus in. But they're also extremely helpful. The fact is that Apple and Android especially are really opening up a lot more options and ways that parents can flag a phone as a teenager's phone or a minor's phone and then set up parental controls. And so you can do things like set up screen time. I think all of us know that. You can flag nudity in private messages to where you can actually block that or at least flag it. You can turn off AirDrop, which protects against things like sexting. There's just a lot of ways that you can lock down that phone. However, you do need to be aware of the fact, and this is important, that not all apps can be managed through parental controls. So you need to understand that there's going to be certain apps like, for instance, maybe Snapchat, other ones like that they do not want to be locked down or restricted in any way because it damages their engagement with the app, with their users. And so they don't let you set up any of those controls on that app. And so just be aware of that. Be aware of what the options are with each individual app. And I'm going to make some overwhelming statements here, John. So hopefully our listeners don't just tune me out. But I would say that you need to be aware of every app that your teen is using on their phone and to thumbs up or thumbs down each one of those. And then after that, I would recommend lock down the App Store so that they can't download other apps. Because that's going to be huge. So that would be important. And then if you really want to get serious about protecting your teenager's phone and perhaps even save yourself some hassle, I think it could make things easier on yourself. I would recommend a service like Bark. Bark is the best one that I've seen out there. And you can either just buy the software or you can actually buy their phone that they put out. And it provides all that filtering and accountability. And it puts it all in one place and tries to walk you through it to save some of the headache of going through those other controls that might be a little bit harder to understand. So those are the three ways that you can limit some of that access digitally on their device.
That may seem kind of overwhelming for some. So kind of break it down here for us. Where's the easiest place to start?
Probably Bark. I would say if you're going to use a service and you want to really, you just say, I'm willing to invest a little bit of money, just make this easy for me. I would say buy the Bark phone and go with that. Or if you want to have, if they want an iPhone, get the software for it. But I would speak to the overwhelming part and say, yes, it is overwhelming. It's confusing. And the reality is I don't have a good answer to that. The technology is just developing so fast. It is overwhelming. It is confusing. And for that reason, it's sometimes easiest just to limit how much they have. Every device adds a new layer of parental controls that you have to learn, and they're all a little bit different. But here's the thing is, as parents, we cannot afford to just say, this is too hard. I give up. Here's your smartphone so you can be like all the other kids, play your games and call me. Just don't be stupid with it. Well, that's not going to work. So, it is hard, but dads, that's what we're here for, to do hard things for our families in order to protect them and provide for them. And this is just one of those areas that you've got to figure out.
Yeah. You address there some common objections, like teens will find a way around it, the filtering, or I can't shield them from everything. How do you encourage parents to keep going despite those challenges?
Yeah, at first I would just push back. I would say you could use that kind of excuse for any area. I mean, you could say, well, even kids wearing seatbelts sometimes get killed in car accidents, so it's not worth the battle of making my toddler wear their seatbelt. They don't want to, and I'll just, who cares? Obviously, we know a lot of parents. None of them would say that, right, John? I mean, and part of it is because it's a societal expectation at this point, whereas in past generations, they didn't wear seatbelts. And there's not that same expectation in some of the safety with the phones. But the reality is, just because putting up the filter is not going to 110% lock everything down and there's ways they can get around it, does not mean that you shouldn't at least do what you can to protect them. But then also, that's the reason why there's not only one layer of protection. This is a three-pronged approach. One is filtering. Right. But if you just only rely on filtering, I'm just going to lock it down so they can't get to anything bad. The reality is that their sinful heart will find a way. So that's why you can't rely totally on filtering. You also need to, especially in the long term, it's even more important to emphasize discipleship. Where's their heart?
Yeah.
And getting to their heart, because that's going to be the most important thing.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that next. I wonder, for the parent who may be overwhelmed and they're like, my teen is so far ahead of me in terms of understanding technology, perhaps even humbling yourself enough to go to your teen and say, hey, can you talk to me about, educate me on what technology can do? And if you put them in the driver's seat there, not in the sense of setting parameters, but involving them in the process, I think it could be really empowering, and it could be really exciting for them to see that, hey, mom and dad actually want to learn, they want to know, and they might actually get a kick out of explaining all the things that you don't understand about different apps. And then you can walk them through, okay, so we need to build this fence. This is going to be important. Obviously, that's part of the discipleship process. And then they can kind of build that fence with you.
That is a really cool idea. I never thought about that, but I bet a lot of teens would get a kick out of that, and that would really speed up the process of learning about all of this.
Well, like you said, filtering and fences have their place, but you observe, quote, when it comes to protecting teens online, building a fence is the most urgent step you must take. However, teaching them to swim is even more important for a long-term protection. I know we just did swim lessons this past summer, and how comforting as a parent to know, my kid knows how, they fall in the pool, they're going to be fine. They know how to swim. That's really important. I love your advice to start early and often. Can you give an example how a parent could introduce age-appropriate conversations about online dangers to say, a preschooler or a middle schooler or a high schooler?
Definitely. Here's some ideas. Preschooler. There's some weird things on their internet, and I want to protect you because I love you. So that's why you never use the tablet without permission from mom or dad.
Yeah.
They're just kind of simple, weird things on the internet. Middle schooler. You know that phrase, practice makes perfect? Let's practice something. What would you say to a friend who wanted to show you pornography? Maybe you would turn away and say, I don't want to see that. Let's practice it. Role play it. High schooler, dad to son. It's easy to be tempted by what we see online. Son, I want you to know that the door is wide open. We can talk about anything. Let's keep any shame or guilt out in the light. It's so much better that way. Or mom to daughter. Have you ever been asked by a boy to send a picture that made you uncomfortable, a picture of yourself? I just want you to understand that no matter what he might say, it's not worth it. Every picture has the potential to be sent to thousands of people. You're too special for that. And those are all suggestions that were taken from a Covenant-ized resource called Family Conversations Guide, which I also mention and link to in my article. Just the idea of an example of 3 age-appropriate conversation starters you could have.
Those are really helpful. You emphasize pointing teens to Christ in these talks as you disciple them. How do you balance practical safety advice with spiritual formation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we talked about this several times on the podcast, I think, but using biblical words. Yeah. So, and I've said this is probably the 3rd time on this podcast, don't be stupid. Okay, that's fine, but wouldn't it get to the heart of the matter as a Christian to talk about sin, to talk about temptation, to talk about lust, to talk about pride, to talk about envy, etc., and to use the biblical principles, and then keep it God-centered. So the reason we take these precautions is not just so that we don't get publicly shamed when a picture gets out, or that even that we have good mental health. I mean, that's so big these days is, protect your mental health and all of that, take care of you. Or even that I have a good marriage someday. You get into pornography, this is going to ruin a future marriage. Yes, it has the potential to do that, and that's worth saying at some point. But the most important reason that we want to do right in all of these areas is to honor the Lord with our technology. And so bringing God and the gospel into every conversation, I think, is vital and will help keep that focus.
Yeah, in addition to the goal for the glory of God, also emphasizing the means by which we get there, which isn't just the fence.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
It isn't even just the training. It is the gospel, right?
Amen.
It is that we are weak, we are sinners, but he's a savior, and he rescued us, and now he's giving us his Holy Spirit so that we can you walk in the Spirit, and you will absolutely not gratify the desires of the flesh. There's hope.
Amen.
That you can give to your children, and we must give to our children.
Right. That's great, John.
Let's move to your final level of protection, which is to provide supervision, accountability. Your story about your dad sitting on the porch while you swim at night was a great analogy for loving accountability. Can you tell that story? Explain how parents apply that mindset online without making their teen feel constantly distrusted.
Yeah, it's kind of the trust but verify type mindset. And when Elise and I were dating in college, she came to visit one time, and I asked if we could go for a night swim. And he said yes, but he sat on the back porch just a ways off and just read his book, while we were out there. And it wasn't intrusive, but it was safe. And so in the same way, parents can set up expectations of accountability from the get-go with their kids. So just start off early with the expectation. You could even just say, we're not going to have a private life online. You're friends with them. We're going to be friends on social media, and I'm going to have your passwords just to be able to check up on you. Not that I'm going to be reading every text message, but if I need to, I can. And so, I think that's good. I was not frustrated by my dad in that situation. I was actually thankful. I think that our teens would respond similarly. And along those lines, another thing that you can tell them is just don't give them a phone. This is your phone. That's very personal and very private, the way that our culture sees it. But even the idea of this is a family phone, we got a new device, we're going to let you use it, and that way if it needs to be taken away, you're taking back a family device, but not something that's personal. So just setting up those expectations from the get-go so it doesn't feel intrusive. I think it often feels intrusive when parents have to backtrack. And so that's why the way that you get into the technology at the get-go is so important.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. You mentioned a few practical ways you can supervise your teen online. So accountability software. Tell us about options that are out there.
Yeah, so there's filtering and there's accountability. Filtering is going to limit their access, and then accountability is going to monitor their online behavior. So both are important, and oftentimes the same company will produce both type of software. So Covenant Eyes is one that's, I think, pretty well known. I have Covenant Eyes on my devices, and accountability partners there, and so that's helpful. But again, I think probably the best one out there for kids is Bark, and so they offer both accountability and filtering. You can do some of the accountability yourself, like I said, just by having the passwords to your kids' social media accounts. I would say one thing to be aware of: a lot of teens have multiple social media accounts. Parents might be like, "What?" It's like, yeah, they probably have 2. Some might even have 3. And so there's that public one where they are friends with their parents. And then sadly, for a lot of teens, there's that second one that it's only certain people that they are friends with. And that's where the more personal stuff comes out. So I would say don't do that, obviously. Have one account, or if you're going to have multiple for whatever reason, your parents should be friends with you on all of those different accounts and should have access to those accounts in case they need or have the need to check up on you.
Yeah. Just to clarify, when you say that these softwares out there are doing accountability, they're facilitating accountability that you are able to provide for your teen. The software is not taking care of that responsibility that ultimately rests with you as their parent, as their loving parent. And so there is a easy tendency for parents to just rely on software. And I just want to, with all this practical advice that we're giving people, I would hope that we and other parents would not rely on the software, but continue to press in to those conversations, to the discipling opportunities with kids, to be able to understand where they're at and how we can help them to love God.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, the computer is just putting you in the room, in a sense, with your kids when they're on technology. It's just giving you access so that you can go ahead and provide that accountability. But the accountability has to come from a real person, which means you have to take the time to check up on those, to open Bark or whatever it is that you're using, and to actually check up on them, and then to have the follow-up discussion if something flags that's potentially a problem or that's concerning.
You also talk about doing technology as a family, and in public spaces, which we talked about some last week with Kris Pennington. How does that work in your home?
Yeah, I mean, just quite simply, our kids don't have tablets or phones. My wife has a tablet, and there's one game we let our kids play this summer. But other than that, all of our tech for the kids is through the TV, which is in the central living room. So that's kind of how we've just kept it basic up to this point. I know that it will have to get more complex than that at some point, but up to now, we've been able to keep it that simple.
Yeah, our kids have received multiple devices through our charter school program, and they use those for a few different school subjects. And I just mentioned that those school devices often have monitoring software on them. Don't rely on that to protect your child.
Right.
And it's probably something you could talk with the IT department or whatever, that if the school provides the device, to first of all understand what they are providing on that device, and then see if you can add to that. Well, assure that you can get something in addition to, because it's probably not sufficient to accomplish your priorities for your kid. In your conclusion, you posed some penetrating questions, Christopher. I'm going to read those. Dads, what if your teenagers use technology the way that you do? You can make all the rules in the world, but your actions always speak louder than your words. Do you have filters set up on your phone? Are you willing to submit to accountability? Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Is there something you need to confess and seek help with? The fact is, these levels of protections don't just apply to our teens, apply to our kids. We need to be protected as well, and we have have a plan in place. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says, "Let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall." We're going to talk more about that next week, how to fight temptation as a man, specifically how to battle lust. For the dad or mom listening who feels like they're already behind, maybe their teen is deep into unmonitored online life where they have bad habits as a parent, what's the first most urgent step to take they can take this week as we kind of wrap up and have a call to action?
Yeah, I mean, out of those three, the most urgent would be the filtering. But even prior to that, I think that you're going to have a conversation as parents and be on the same page.
Yeah.
So because you're going to get pushback if you try to pull this technology thing back with your teen, or even your child, you're going to get pushback. And so it's important that mom and dad are on the same page. So sit down with your spouse, with your wife, share this podcast, share my article. There's a lot of other helpful articles you can find. Protect Young Eyes is a resource I've mentioned earlier. I'll mention it again. It's the best I know out there that's really raising the alarm and providing very, very good practical helps in this area. But sit down together, agree with the dangers, and then get a general game plan together. You don't have to understand all the details. You probably won't, but at least that you're on the same wavelength about how to approach this. And then after that, I would say talk to your child, talk to your teen, explain to them that this has been an area where you've been negligent at protecting them, but you want to change that. And sit down, like you mentioned earlier, over a bowl of ice cream, some kind of a less threatening environment. Don't make this a lecture like they're in trouble. But just begin to gather information and begin to set a tone that, hey, this is going to be something that we're going to be changing. We're going to be putting some things in place. And then, once you decide what you're going to do, I would say just follow through and push through, even though you're going to get pushback. And you will get pushback, but it's worth it. I was talking to a therapist once. I don't even remember where I heard this specifically, but he said that he had a patient, I think it might have been someone I met at a camp, but he said he had a patient who was having some real mental health issues because of her phone. I think it was a teenage girl, and her parents decided that it was going to be best for them to take it away. And that was a decision that was made with the therapist and her parents. And the girl went just absolutely ballistic in the office. I mean, throwing a fit, a temper tantrum, threatening suicide, everything. But the parents and the therapist were convinced that this had to happen. And so the girl came back a short time later, and she was a completely different person. Like, this decision to set aside the smartphone actually did have some very big ramifications and really helped her. And she told the therapist this. She said, I complained about it to my friends to save face. And they had said, the dad had said, you can blame it on me. You can blame it on me. If it makes you weird, just blame it on your dad. And so she kind of did. But she also made the comment that she said she was extremely thankful to her dad for helping her in that way. That even she realized the benefits and was willing to admit in this safe space that it was very helpful for her, and she was thankful. So just a reminder to be courageous. That sometimes your kids are not going to be thankful initially for the things that you're trying to do to help them. But eventually, in the long run, they will.
That's a good word. Thank you, Christopher. Making your teens part of the conversation is important, especially because it trains them. So I encourage you guys, make your teens part of that, and then be courageous. Step out and talk with them after you talk with your spouse. Those are good calls to action. Pray that we can move forward with those. We're also going to have a list of key resources, as well as a link to your article in our show notes. So make sure to check those out. This is just a start. So you have to do the hard work after listening to this. That includes me, to keep moving forward and continue to learn as a dad. We're going to come to lessons from dad. And, I had a different lesson from dad planned, but I want to share really briefly about my father-in-law, because when I was pursuing Suzanne towards marriage, like I was convinced that she was the one, and I reached out to her dad for kind of permission to move forward with that relationship in a more purposeful way. I ended up going out to, it started as like a lunch, and then it ended up into like an afternoon like a dinner. It was like a 6-hour ordeal with him. But
my goodness.
He really patiently asked me a lot of questions about all different types of things. And one of them centered here on this uncomfortable topic of online presence and pornography and lust. And so he just asked me a lot of hard questions, and I really appreciate that, and just would encourage dads that are listening to this to have that courage to be able to ask hard questions of that guy that's going to come along wanting to date your daughter. It may be that guy has never had hard questions asked of him, and he's really in need of discipleship. So I don't know who needs to hear that, but that's important for you to address, both for your own children and also for your future children. Go ahead and open up that conversation with those who would like to be a part of your family. I appreciate that about my father-in-law, because I know he really cared about his daughter, and he's been a great encouragement to me.
Amen.
Christopher,
Amen.
Would you close us in prayer? Ask for God's grace for us and for all the dads listening.
Yeah, I will. Lord, I just thank you for the time we've had to be together today. And I want to pray for any of the dads that are listening, maybe watching. I pray that you'd encourage them. I know this is a topic that can be discouraging. It can be overwhelming. We're already so busy, and there's so many things we're trying to keep track of. And this just can feel like an overwhelming topic to get a handle on. Lord, I pray that we'd be encouraged, that you have given us all of the grace that we need to obey you in every area of our lives, and to be wise. And I pray that we would, as dads, work hard at this, the same way that we work hard in other areas of our life, to protect our kids, to see the value. Lord, anyone that's listening and maybe they're not convinced, maybe they don't see the dangers, Lord, I pray that you'd open up their eyes, and that they would do their research, and that they would see the potential destructiveness that can happen through unfiltered internet. And I pray that you protect our kids, our teens. They're seeing so much that young eyes should not see. And Lord, I just pray that you would help them as they deal with the aftermath of that, and that many of them would never have to deal with that in the first place. Lord, give us grace to disciple our teens and children in the world that we live, to teach them how to interact with all of these technologies in ways that please you, and use them to glorify you rather than to sin and to magnify sin. Thank you for the technology you have given us, and how it can enable us to know you better through studying your word more deeply, and to connect with others and spread the gospel message. I just thank you for your love for us, and I pray that everyone watching this podcast would be encouraged. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So what about when offense and the training and the supervision aren't enough, when you or your child starts drowning in sin? Next week, we're going to tackle the topic of fighting lust, which is one of the strongest temptations for men. I mentioned that earlier. So we'll look forward to that time together. Please support us by simply giving us a rating on your podcast app. Also, if you subscribe to our channel on YouTube, that would be great. As always, we love to hear from you. Podcast at growingfathers.com. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great week.